doing what you say you're gonna do, being reliable, you know, and not just looking at the projects as like a one-off, like, okay, we finished a job, we got paid, we made money, that's great. But we'd always look at it as not that project, but where's the 10 behind it? And, you know, we'd always kind of have more of a, we wouldn't have the blinders on when we're talking to customers. And I think that showed a lot, and through the main guys we work with, that was definitely appreciated. We formed close friendships over it. We still fly, you know, we'll fly to Florida and do kind of team building trips, and we'll go to the Carolinas and stuff like that. But it's all a lot, the importance of actually maintaining the friendship throughout the entire process is actually a lot more meaningful than I thought it was going to be. So basically it's, I'd say, integrity and maintaining the, you know, the friendly relationships with, you know, your main customers. So I work for Pro Circuit Electrical Contracting. It actually began with my partner, Josh. He formed the company about 9 years ago. We went on full-time partners about 5 years ago. I had my own company, Martinelli Electric, and we worked together informally for quite some time. And eventually, after a couple years, we decided to kind of mash everything together. Pro Circuit sounds a lot better for a, you know, commercial company than Martinelli Electric, so we went with that name. But yeah, that's how we got started. So really, my partner started the company, and been about 5 years full-time. Started out, he had him and just one guy in a van. And then once we partnered up, we grew that to, I think we've got 9 vans now and 20 employees. So it's grown pretty good. So in electrical work, we got started because when I was about 18, my dad said that I had to get a job or I was kicked out of the house. At the same time, they had just bought a hot tub, and he was complaining nonstop about how much money it costs for the electrician to wire the hot tub. So that kind of set a, you know, bells off in my head. I was like, hot electrician, huh? So just went and got a job, you know, out of the paper, and, you know, said I didn't know anything, you know, started literally just teaching me how to wire outlets and, you know, little things like that in houses, and slowly climbed my way up the ladder from there. After about 7 or 8 years doing electrical work, my boss at the time said that he had there was a class he wanted us to go to in Fort Lauderdale. And I said, you know, it's a solar course. You know, I think this is going to be popular. I think we should start getting into it. Let's just check out the course and see what we think afterwards. I wasn't really interested in solar at that point. I just thought it was those lights that you kick over in the lawn all the time. You know, I didn't really even realize there was much more of an industry behind it at that point, but it was in Fort Lauderdale. So that pretty much sold me on it. We went down for the course, and I kind of became like mesmerized and fell in love with it. You know, during our time there, the guy who actually was the instructor, he ran a company or like a nonprofit organization called Solar Suitcase, where they actually would take solar panels and batteries and charge controllers, and they would design them to fit into suitcases, and they would actually smuggle them into third world countries, and they would use it to like power like blood banks and things like that, where the grid was very unstable. So the fact that they were using that technology to kind of do something passionate like that, you know, really kind of took my attention, and, you know, I kind of started obsessing over it over the next couple days. Unfortunately, when we got back, my boss at the time said, yeah, I don't think we're going to pursue it. I was like, all right. But I immediately started looking for jobs in solar at that point, and, you know, kind of just had it set in my head, this is what I was going to do. So, you know, and I still keep in touch with them, thank them all the time for the opportunity, but, you know, it wasn't long after we came back from that trip that I was starting a new job. So what we found, I think probably the most interesting, is how small and tight-knit the industry is. I can't really speak much for the West Coast. We don't do work out there, but we work up and down the entire East Coast. And it's amazing how the same players that we deal with in New Jersey are the same players in Florida, the same players in Georgia, the same players in Louisiana. And the companies, you know, we've made a lot of friends and connections over the years, and when somebody kind of parts ways with the company that they're at, we almost every single time end up working with them again at another company. So it's just amazing to me just how many people end up working in a, you know, relatively tight-knit, you know, industry. You know, it's definitely was surprising. So the hardest part of owning the business, I would say, is probably managing the workforce. where, you know, it's a constant battle between, with what we do, having too much work and not enough employees, or too many employees and not enough work. You know, the relationships and the billing and the office work is, you know, all kind of not much of a problem. Doing the work is obviously a lot of work, but, you know, we can get through that part of it. It's really kind of finding harmony in the amount of people that you have working for you and the amount of work that you have to keep them going. You know, everyone's got families and mouths to feed, and they rely on us to make that happen. So it's a lot of pressure, and I think that's probably the hardest part. So I think there's a lot of people in the commercial world, and I should probably clarify, we do all commercial industrial, so we don't really get involved in residential, but it's still a relevant question. I think it kind of goes also into the residential world. I know a lot of people kind of have it in their minds that they can get free solar. You know, they see the ads, they get the phone calls, but, you know, it's legit, but there's also more to it. You know, you don't actually own it in certain scenarios, and lease programs and things like that. A lot of people also think, oh, I have solar, if I lose power, now I'm good. You know, and it doesn't work that way as of right now anyway. But, like, you have to be profitable enough to be able to take that amount of money, which is, you know, could be 30% of the cost of the system, to offset your tax bill. But if you're a company that doesn't, you know, quote unquote, make a lot of money, you know, or depending on how the books are ran, if you're not a profitable company, even though you may want solar, you're really not going to be able to get the tax credits, because you'd have to be, you know, showing a lot more, you know, profit on the books. So I think a lot of it does end up being driven financially. It's not as simple as I want solar, I'm going to buy solar. A lot of it is more, you know, you have to actually qualify for the rebates and be able to utilize them properly. And I think once certain people start looking into it, you know, that tends to be a hurdle, you know, for some companies. Larger companies like Target and Home Depot and those types of guys, like they have no problem. There's, you know, an infinite tax appetite for a lot of those guys. So, you know, those are some of our best customers too. Probably what I wish I knew, I would say, just how important the relationships are in running a business and maintaining a customer base. I guess for a long time I thought, you know, you had like a sales team, you did marketing, things like that, and that's all still relevant. But for us, what we found was the key to success really was integrity. One unfortunate part of owning your own, you know, company is you're pretty much always working. Family can, you know, they know very well basically that my phone rings, I answer it, you know, pretty much all the time, 24/7. I get frustrated sometimes when it's employees that are, you know, kind of really didn't need to make that phone call, but, you know, everybody knows that I'm going to answer my phone if you call, and if I can't answer, I call you right back. You know, it's very important to me to, you know, have that reputation. So, you know, as far as like hours go, it's 24/7. You know, that's the best way I could put it. Day starts, you know, me and my partner, we've basically made a commitment to each other to make sure that we stay healthy throughout it, to keep kind of, you know, a good state of mind. So we start every day, we go to the gym. You know, that's you know, first and foremost. Sometimes we'll be on conference calls trying to pretend like I'm not at the gym, you know, but we find it very important to go there to keep keep healthy, keep a good state of mind. No matter what's going on, it can wait, you know, for an hour as we, you know, kind of do that. And him and I actually, we usually talk about business stuff while we're there, you know, working out and everything. So it's still kind of working, but, you know, it's very important to us. After that, we actually split it up where Mondays and Tuesdays he goes into the field and, you know, kind of scouts the job sites, and, you know, we have a personal presence, you know, there, so we can see what's going on, make sure we're connecting with the employees and the guys and everything. Wednesdays and Thursdays, I'll do that. I'll take that turn, and he'll stay back and do the office work. And then Fridays are really a free-for-all. It just depends on what's going on. So I mean, a lot of it is, in my position, it's just sitting at a keyboard. You know, there's a lot of paperwork, a lot of contracts and billing and stuff like that. You know, I get involved in all of that. So it's really, you know, a lot of it's gym and then keyboard time and a lot of phone calls. But like I said, it'll go pretty much, you know, through the evening until everybody kind of settles down for dinner. And then it usually tampers out. You know, for the most part, people are respectful for, you know, after hours stuff, but you always get those calls every now and then, 8, 9 o'clock at night. Hey, I'm not going to be in tomorrow, or, you know, so-and-so called out, I need to get another hand. And then we kind of got to scramble and, you know, start pulling the plan together. Before electrician, my plan was I was going to be a rock star. You know, that it still is a hobby of mine, playing guitar and music, but, eventually I came to the realization that I wasn't gonna make it there, so, no, it wasn't always the plan, but as soon as I got into electrical work, I kind of stuck with it and really enjoyed it. And I just, like I said, once I eventually got into solar, that was the biggest thing. I actually didn't go to any higher education after high school. I wish I would have at this stage of my life. I wish I would have gone for electrical engineering. It would have put me in a better position. Fortunately, I was able to use my own personal skills to navigate around that and not have it hold me back. But without a doubt, when you're engaging in large value projects, and you're talking to people, you get that question a lot, where'd you graduate from? And it's always a little bit awkward from trying to explain, we didn't go that route. But that being said, I still did a lot of training, did a lot of tests. I'm licensed in 10 states now, so it's there's been a lot of book work still. It just hasn't been through formal education. The grid infrastructure in the country right now. And there's a lot of upgrades going on. That's a big part of what the new administration is pushing. It all takes time and money, but there's a budget and there's a schedule that's actually being put into place. So if you think about it, if you've got all this solar power that's powering all these homes, right? And then you get a massive storm comes in and clouds all of a sudden cover 40% of it. The grid is not really able in an efficient manner to counter that, what I mean? It's kind of like these sudden rushes of current and power that's going, and then all of a sudden it's gone and then it's back again. So it's a little difficult for them to manage it. That's where energy storage comes in, batteries and things like that. That's all more of an emerging market, but that's the direction everything's headed. And there's other countries that are already making it mandatory to introduce that. The biggest setback that we see right now, and in my opinion, it's a major problem in the industry, they keep trying to make these systems safer. Every time there's a fire, it's bad for the industry. It's bad for everybody. So they keep implementing new rules and new equipment, but it's done in a way in which I think it's too quick right now. So for instance, they put these they're called module level protection devices, rapid shutdown devices. It's a little box that goes on, a conventional, DC powered system. Little box goes under every panel, right? So it's supposed to make the system safer. Fire department, somebody can hit a button, the entire thing shuts down to a certain amount of volts within a certain amount of time, and that's great. What we've seen on a lot of the systems we've been commissioning is those very devices that are supposed to make things safer, they actually fail at times, and when they fail, they catch on fire. So you've got these devices that you're putting thousands and thousands of them on a building, and then we're finding that there's a lot of problems. And when they go back to product support, it's, oh yeah, no, there was a firmware upgrade that was supposed to have. Yeah, we're just gonna replace all those under warranty. And it's like, all right, but in the meantime, somebody spent a lot of time and energy installing it. They're literally catching on fire. It's kind of scary in that sense, right? So to me, that's the biggest problem right now is I think, aside from all the other problems that everybody has across the world, supply chain issues and labor source issues, that's not really unique to solar. I think it's really the new equipment that's coming into play that people are trying to implement to make the system safer. And like I said, there's kind of this other thing going on that a lot of people aren't aware of that the industry is trying to hurry up and fix. And it's, I think, a lot bigger of a problem than people realize. And, for instance, if you're a large company, right, and you've got 50 stores and one of them has this problem, you're gonna get real scared to keep going to the next 50 stores if you just had one, where you had to shut the whole thing down and go on fire watch. I think the biggest thing is, make sure you keep a good state of mind. It's real easy to get hung up with working yourself to exhaustion. You wanna do everything you can to, be successful, but it's real easy to work yourself into the ground. And when you start doing that, you start deteriorating your other relationships, with your family, with your friends, and ultimately that'll, kind of blend in with your customer base as well. So I think it's important to, maintain a good state of mind, keep busy with healthy, activities, and, make sure you're still finding a way to have fun with it, because you're gonna be doing this for a long time, hopefully. And if you're not having fun, then what are you really doing?